This route should be designed wider and will therefore be more obvious to the player. In urban design, it's important for these primary circulation points to connect to primary nodes of activity. In this case, the nodes will be the town center and the entrances to the other maps. Having secondary routes helps to create permeability and greater mobility in the town. In a city, you generally don't want to create a dead end in a public road unless it ends at a point of interest. So the same thing applies here. I played a lot of games where levels are designed with a lot of dead ends, often for no reason, and it usually kills some of the fun and that feeling of freedom. Another important aspect of good urban design is opening up the buildings up to the pedestrian realm. In a city, the most popular streets that pedestrians like to gather are the ones that are lined with shops and activities. The places that are not popular are streets alongside a big blank face of a building, or uncontained plazas that are way too big. It's important for public spaces to have a permeable membrane where activities can happen on either side, and where people can pass back and forth. For the design of this seaside town, it's important to line all of the pathways with shops and activities related to the game. This strategy helps to maximize liveliness and even player immersion. Finally, it's important to design the town based on constraints of the top-down view. Since this is a top-down 2D game, the player can only look at everything from one direction, and therefore you get into this weird situation where you never see the backs of any object. From the side, it would look like this. If you create anything with height, and your player character walks behind it, your character would no longer be visible in this dead zone. Some games fade out buildings or objects to reveal the player, but I think this isn't the best solution. First of all, it just doesn't look good, especially if it's a big object, and second, you would still have all this dead space behind the object that isn't used for anything. My solution is to just design the map in a way that minimizes the amount of dead spaces that exist. For example, instead of having a flat surface, you can simply lift the ground up, and the dead zone is eliminated. This creates a cliff, which is a nice visual addition, and adds some verticality to the scene. A second option is to add some lower objects in between to mitigate the dead space, like trees. In this case, the character will only be partially obstructed by smaller objects, but you'd still be able to see the character. One last solution is to embed the building right into the ground. This also helps to add verticality to the scene and provide some interesting variety to the environment instead of having only freestanding buildings. With all of this in mind, I've decided that the town will be built on a hill, getting higher and higher towards the top of the map. Using hills and cliffs to improve visibility is an old level design technique used in games such as Pokemon and Final Fantasy. In these games, you can really see that there are an abundance of these instances, and everything is built on a mountain. Now that the massing and circulation are set, and the functions are labeled, it's time to create some buildings. I'm not going to go into too much detail into the design process of each individual building, but I will talk about the general concept of each chunk of buildings, and how I wanted them to relate and interact with the town as a whole. Because this is a rural town set in a sci-fi world, I'm going for a mixture of old and new architecture to show that element of technology encroaching into the countryside. I think I will use a mixture of both European and Asian architecture, much like the world design of a lot of Studio Ghibli films. Taking the bathhouse from Spirited Away as an example, the front of the building contains obvious Japanese architectural influences. However, if you look at the backside, it features an industrialist/steampunk aesthetic, and the interiors of this bathhouse contains elements of old European architecture. This combination of styles is really interesting and brings a dreamlike quality to this architecture. The architecture of Chef RPG will contain similar elements. However, because the game will be set roughly 40 years ahead in the future, the steampunk elements present in a lot of Studio Ghibli films will be traded in for cyberpunk-styled constructions. So less copper pipes and steam, and more robotics and neon lights. So we're going to start with the upper portion of the map where the market is located. These buildings will be taller and have shops all along the ground floor. 2 to 3 story buildings with shops on the ground and residents on the upper levels are sort of an ideal typology for creating engaging pedestrian spaces. Since this is a rural town, there's really no reason for any building to get any taller than this. I wanted to use a sci-fi style for these buildings, combined with some older stone buildings in the middle. This segment will contain the butcher shops, with the town square right in front. I felt here that it's better to just have open shops where your character can directly interact with the butcher, instead of creating another doorway and another room for each individual shop, because doing that would result in too many rooms, but more importantly, if there's a room for every single shop, it gets annoying for the player to have to go in and out of every building to buy all their ingredients, and deal with potential load times each time. On top of that, I really just like the aesthetic of these tight and compact open market stalls. The market should really feel alive, so I'm just adding a selection of meats, sausages, and whatnot. Since these buildings are relatively large, when you're actually playing the game, you probably won't be able to see the entire building and the surrounding context. Creating as much detail as possible on this smaller scale really helps to bring the scene alive. On the right side of these three buildings will be a clock tower, followed by some veggie, fruit, and liquor shops. I decided to add an older brick cafe building here, and this could be a sort of tavern where the player can meet and interact with a lot of NPCs. Again, going for a mixture of building styles in this area. I wanted to show a messier, more organic side of the town, sort of contrasting with the higher end buildings on the left. Since this town is essentially one big market, big lit up signs are a must-have. Finally, adding a sidewalk helps to contain and mediate the buildings and the main square. This also helps to add a bit more color and variety to the scene. Here, I think it's really important to give the ground a bit of variety and texture to make it really worn and dirty. The worst thing that could happen is if everything looks really sterile. I decided to throw in a little brick in here for the cafe, although I don't know if this aesthetic will stay. Going back to the idea of the high-tech encroaching onto the traditional, some metal vents with blinking lights straddle this old structure, creating an interesting juxtaposition. And that's about it for the upper segment. Next, I wanted to create the center portion of the map, which links up with the market and town square. Starting on the right side, there's going to be apartments and general store for buying a variety of common ingredients. Here, I wanted to isolate the apartments on an elevated platform to divert away from the main path. On the right, I decided I want to add more shops instead of leaving an empty space here. I also just remembered that there needs to be a hair salon and some clothing stores. So a lower path alongside ground-embedded stone buildings fit this space really well. These will be facing the waterfront. Again, similar to the upper buildings, the ground level will feature shops and activities, and the second level will contain residences. I'm really trying to be careful how many doors I draw because it should really be a game where every door is accessible. This is really important when creating an open-world RPG, and especially for 2D RPGs, where being able to access every door is essentially a given. At the boundary between the town and the water, I wanted to show that encroachment of corporate technology. The waterfront buildings are shielded from the water by this cyberpunk-style metal barrier. I'm playing around with the idea of just one corporation that supplies advanced infrastructure and energy to the game world. This could be one example of that. This metal barrier could help to protect the town from floods, as well as generating hydroelectricity. However, the town folks will forever have to live with this reminder of the power and influence of these corporations. The final zone features the docks, which the fish markets will be located. I'm starting by setting up the wooden promenade, which leads to the center area, where the player can eventually have access to the fishing boats. I left a little dead end here, which could be an interesting spot for future story events. For the design of the buildings, I'm really inspired by Asian fish markets. Just the liveliness of them, all the color and energy. Now, I don't think it's really practical to create such a large market in this game, since it would just end up being a background with minimal function. I think 2 shops in this area is enough, and adding more would just drag out the gameplay. Imagine having to go through 10 different shops to buy all the seafood you need. So, trying to capture as much of the essence from some Asian fish markets, I started developing a similar aesthetic. I'm also creating a supply store and 2 booths for fish shops. Starting with a structure on the left, I wanted to mix it up here and use wood construction architecture to match with the docks. This also makes practical sense because heavier structures made of stone or metal would not be able to be supported by some wooden stilts. Markets like this typically look amazing at night because of all the lights and colors, so I'm making more spaces to put in some signs in the future. On the right side of this structure, I wanted to introduce that corporate technology element. I'm imagining this big metal machine latching onto the side of the building, almost like a parasite. To finish up the fish market, I wanted to throw in some colorful hanging lanterns just to bring in some more color and to provide light at night. These look good for now, but I think I will come back to this in the future and just bring in more lanterns and more neon signs. Really just trying to bring in as much life and energy into the market as possible. Going back to the upper segment, I wanted to add a couple more buildings on the outskirts of the town just to help balance the town out. I like the aesthetic of the wood buildings and the docks, so adding a couple houses on this edge balances the styles out over the map. A building I previously made was dropped on the right side of the map, which contains some shops and a crepe store. Now, after the 3 segments are put together, the whole map looks like this. So definitely getting there, but requires some finishing touches to really make this shine. One thing that needs work is the transition between the hardscape and the grass. A flat transition just doesn't look that good. So here I tried to create a nature taking over / post-apocalyptic look. where nature is taking back the city. I think it looks comparatively better than a straight end. What I don't want is for this town to look really rigid. Even if the buildings themselves create a lot of straight lines, there are plenty of ways to create a bit of organicism and chaos in the scene. Jumping back to the docks, making the water look good is extremely important. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but essentially I added a water line for animations, adding some reflections of the waterfront structures, and finally adding some wave textures to the water. Getting the water to look good in-game will be fairly difficult and will likely involve the use of shaders in combination with animations. Here's the cyberpunk style fishing vessel from a previous video. Just implemented a quick waterline and some underwater shading. Animations will eventually need to be added to this as well. Architecture and cities do not exist in isolation, and their contrast with their surroundings are really what makes built forms unique. So, to really bring this scene together, I'm finishing up all of the surrounding landscape and dropping in some trees. I don't have too many preferences, except to just create a good variety of randomness in the landscape. The wilder the landscape looks, the better, so this may need some changes in the future to achieve that. It'd be really cool for this to end up a semi-sci-fi village sitting in the middle of a rugged and wild landscape. Because Chef RPG has an active time and season system, I'm going to create a fall version of this map, because everything just looks better in the fall. It's a fairly simple process of selecting color ranges on certain layers and changing the hue until it reaches a color that you like. And there you go, the town is finally complete. I think it looks pretty good at a distance, though I have some slight concerns over close-ups of certain areas. So some of these areas may need to be revamped in the future. Finally, I'm going to just import all of this into Unity, and we can take an in-game walkthrough to see how it feels. So here we are in Unity. I'm currently just placing some tree prefabs I made earlier and dropping them into the scene. Animations and season change scripts have already been added to these trees, so it's really just a simple matter of dropping them into the map. Here I'm creating a series of polygon colliders in the map so that your character won't just walk off the map and won't be walking off walls. So after a couple more adjustments in Unity, the map is now at a working state. For now, I'm going to jump back into the coding side of things and really push the cooking gameplay to a working state. Really looking forward to show you guys the restaurant gameplay when it's ready. I'm going to leave you guys with a quick in-game walkthrough. For now, I dropped in some randomly generated NPCs with a basic AI so that they can walk around town. With some people walking around the town, we can get a general feel for the town's atmosphere. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.
I'm using what would be a straight line, making it imperfect, to say, hey, there is a disturbance in this flat shape, and it is in the shape of wood grains. And that's all you really need to get that impression. Hey guys, welcome to pretty much the first tutorial that I may be producing that covers something that is directly for Insignia, my game, and is something that I'm working on right now, basically covering my process on how I approach architecture. I had a brief for myself in the game that there was going to be a pub or a tavern or an inn in every chapter of the game. So every major city has one of these places, like a bar. And in this second chapter, a lot of the architecture is much more diverse. It's more of an urban environment, so things are more clustered in general, and has sort of more character as a city. So this originally started as, I had built like a series of buildings, and this one here I really like the shape of. I came up with this idea that some of these buildings would have like second stories that were built after the fact, and then like a little balcony, just to give some diversity of shape. And I wanted to run with that concept for the pub, and I was thinking about the space considerations that I needed for the things that were going to be in the pub. That's, you know, the barman and quest givers that are sitting down in the pub, that kind of thing. So I was playing around with the basic shape here in Leonardo, the sketching app that I use, and I came to this point where I had like a lot of sort of horizontal space that I created, and I still wanted that second story, and I wanted to play with this idea of a balcony. And eventually I came up with a design like this one, and thought that it looked kind of like a shoe. So this is called the Shoe Inn. It has a few basic things that I needed, and then I used references to sort of pad out the rest of it. So I had a lot of references that went into this. Most of them were Irish pubs, but also just the shape of a shoe that I wanted to sort of at least hint at with more than just the L shape of the building. So one of those things, this is the ground level here, so this is ground. One of those is this heel that's here, that steps down into the rest of the shoe. You can't really see it, but it's like this area here, and then it comes down, and it's like a gutter, or like a skirting around the building. It makes it look a little bit more like a shoe. This, basically, right? I also have this idea of like the flap over the boot, and you could think of that as, you know, either the pitched roof here, or this sort of like tent window structure coming off the side. Then for like the actual pub itself, the decorations, we're going to be going for something that's an Irish pub. I looked at a lot of these references for ideas about how to decorate it and how the entrance would look like. Flower boxes are very, very common in the UK and Ireland. So that's something that you see a lot of here, and was a clear reference for these buildings in general. So a lot of them have flower boxes and have that Tudor style. The next thing was, you know, other sort of decorations you see out the front, so barrels, very common, signs or like little stands for menus and things like that. I also had this idea that I wanted, this is something that we have in Australia, I don't know if this is common anywhere else in the world, but we have this basically cellar sort of setup where the delivery van that comes and brings the alcohol, I mean, I imagine this isn't Australian, so, or maybe it is, I can't really tell. The van that delivers the alcohol drops it off in the cellar rather than having to take it upstairs or bring it into the premises. So I have this idea of there being like a little side window cellar here. So we're going to be focusing on the exterior today, and maybe in another tutorial we can do the interior. This is kind of the reference point for the architecture for a lot of the game. I want to talk you very quickly through sort of what my references are and what I'm looking at. As I said previously, this is sort of like a Tudor house, or Tudor architecture style. What that means is a lot of timber, a lot of stucco on the outside of the buildings. We've got tiles on top. Having the second story be like overhanging the first story. So here's an example of something that I've already created in this style recently. This is a sort of redux of Armand's house. You can see I've still got the, you know, light sort of stucco exterior. We've got those timber frames bordering the building. We've got the windows built into the frame. I have these rounded, decorative sort of timber designs here to give it a bit more warmth. And you can see that in general, like, this is quite caricatured. It's quite small compared to what you would expect. A lot of these measurements are a lot bigger than they would be to make it more sort of chibi. So the thickness of this tile, of this edge here, is much thicker than what you'd expect tiles to be. It makes it feel more like a toy house. It makes sense that there would be a little bit of bowing, maybe, but I think having it be so much, so dramatic here gives us a more homely feel. It makes it feel more like it was made by someone who's not a robot, which, when you're producing pixel art, is quite difficult to do because there's such a temptation to stay within the lines. Let's approach building this building. What I want to do first is make sure that it will fit inside of the scope of everything else in the game. So I'm going to now just draw like the basic shape for the building, and I'm going to keep faith with this first story and then the second story. I kind of want it to be a focal point when you're walking down the street. I do want it to stand out from the others, so I'm going to break one of these lines to make it a little taller and a little more grandiose than the other buildings. I think what I'll do is I want to emphasize the front door, which is going to be something like here, because I want you to really see that. And that means I'm going to put the building on a little bit of an angle where its facade is facing the camera a little bit more than the others. And again, as usual, I'm using colors here that, you know, aren't fully representative of what I would be using, but that's kind of on purpose, right? That's definitely on purpose. Because I haven't made that choice yet about what colors I'm using. I'm just using some nice clear colors that will help me understand the shapes a bit better. There were a few other things, right? We wanted this to be called the shoe-in. So at this point, remember talking about silhouettes? I really want to make sure that you can tell that this is a shoe, or at least once you know that it's called the shoe-in, that you can understand, oh yeah, it does look like a shoe. So that heel that I was talking about before, and the step in the sole, that is, it's really important to get those right now, because they are quite literally architectural elements. I want to make sure that I am keeping faith with that organic approach that I was referring to earlier. And what that means is basically to avoid dead straight lines.
Эффективная работа снабжения – это залог успешного развития компании. Каждый рубль, сохраненный на закупках, идет в прибыль. Автоматизация снабжения – это дорого и сложно? Специально для малого и среднего бизнеса мы создали доступный облачный сервис Mertago. Используя Mertago, вы сделаете работу снабжения эффективной. На 80% снижение трудозатрат. Автоматизируйте выбор поставщиков, отправку запросов и предложений. Упростите планирование оплат поставщикам и контроль отгрузок. Сократите расходы.
In this video, I'm going to share with you guys my top 10 things you guys should know before coming to Japan. As some of you guys already know, I've lived in Japan for more than 15 years, and that I live in the center of it all, here in Shibuya. But when I first came to Japan from the US, there's so many things that I didn't know or understand. So in this video, I wanted to share with you guys the top 10 things that I wish someone told me before I came here. And let me know in the comment section if you find any of the things that I mentioned in the video kind of weird. And if you want to help support the channel, check out my Tokyo merch. I'll leave a link below. Let's get started. So first thing, let's talk about cash in Japan. Probably coming from a lot of modern countries, you think that you can use credit cards because, you know, you think Japan is a modern country itself. But what you'll find is that a lot of places here in Japan won't accept credit cards. Strange, right? I mean, who really wants to carry around cash in their pocket all the time? But the reality is, in Japan, a lot of people still carry around cash. In fact, I probably have $10,000, $20,000 in my pocket at any given time just because I have to use cash so much. But before I get into all of the places that don't, in fact, I probably have $10,000, $20,000 in my pocket at any given time just because I have to use cash so much. But before I get into all of the places that don't accept credit cards, let me share with you some places that do. Major department stores or retailers, mid to upper end restaurants, convenience stores, amusement parks, airports. Now some shops that probably don't accept credit cards are small mom and pop restaurants, local bars, street food vendors, a lot of restaurants who serve set meals during lunchtime, small retailers, and some taxis. Although more and more are accepting credit card meals during lunchtime, small retailers, and some taxis. Although more and more are accepting credit cards these days. Even some fast food places don't take credit cards, so you should be careful. Also, if you're planning to travel outside of the city, be prepared to bring enough cash because it's even more likely for places not to accept credit cards. As a local tip, I find that my Visa card is accepted at most places, while sometimes my American Express is hit and miss. Also, if you want to minimize carrying cash around, you can get a Suica card or a Pasmo card. It costs about 500 yen, and you can load it up to 20,000 yen in cash, so you can use it at a lot of places, but mainly it's used for train stations. So you don't need to buy a ticket each time when you get to the train, and it automatically calculates the fare when you get out. Just tap in and then tap out. But you can also use it at convenience stores, many street vending machines, taxis, train kiosks, some restaurants, shops, and even electronic stores like Big Camera accept it. Now, if you're looking to withdraw cash in Japan, I suggest Sberbank ATM, Japan Post ATMs, and Prestia Bank, as they are best at handling foreign cards. So eating and drinking while walking on the street. So in many respects, it's considered bad manners to walk and eat at the same time, even if you get food on the go, like sandwiches or onigiris. This rule may sound weird to you, but for Japanese people, eating a sandwich is the same as eating a big bowl of pasta while walking. Yeah, weird. If you want to eat or drink in public, the best thing to do is stop and chill on the side of the street. But all in all, walking and eating won't get you in trouble, but people will stare at you and look at you as if you were brought up badly. Or maybe even the older generation actually will say something to you. But there's always exceptions to the rule, and one of those exceptions is tabe aruki spots. Tabe aruki means to eat and walk. So these are places like Tsukiji Fish Market. These places are intended for people to buy food and eat on the street, and as it's named in Japanese, okay to walk too. But one thing you should know is that even in these areas, some shops don't allow you to walk and eat. But it should say on the storefront just to let you know. Festivals are another exception, and as more shops like Starbucks offer to-go items like coffee, you'll see more and more Japanese people walking around with coffee cups in their hand, ultimately changing the culture of Japan. The real issue why it's thought of as bad manners in Japan is because it's considered meiwaku, which means it bothers other people. People here are sensitive with strong food smells, and it would be the worst if you spill food or drinks on them by accident. But there's all types of people in Japan. I'm sure you guys have that one friend or family member that's more easily bothered by the slightest thing. Depending on who you ask, it may be different. So what I can tell you is, if you're really not sure what to do and you're kind of confused, just stop walking if you're eating. So drinking in Japan.
Create professional and beautiful videos faster within moments.
The drinking age here is 20 years old. I was so surprised when I first came here. I was like, wow, you can actually drink here at 20 years old? So you can literally go to any convenience store and they'll sell you alcohol and not ask you how old you are if you just look like you're 20 years old. In fact, there are still beer vending machines on streets, in hotels, etc. They don't even require any proof of age. But recently in Japan, they've made it a little bit more strict. Let me show you. I select my beer, I go to the counter, the clerks scan the drink, and the register screens and asks if I'm over 20 years old. I tap yes, I pay, and I'm all good to go. What do you guys think? Too strict? Too easy? How is it in your country? So let's talk about tattoos at the onsen. Japanese onsens, aka hot springs, are one of the coolest experiences you can have in Japan. Unfortunately, many Japanese onsen prohibit people with tattoos from entering the facility because of the stigma associated with tattoos in Japan. Yakuza, or also known as organized crime, are known to have characteristic irezumi, also known as tattoos. Since a lot of these onsen facilities don't want Yakuza going to their establishment or scaring their customers, they made like a blanket statement saying that anyone with tattoos, small or large, can't enter the place. Although it may sound unfair, it's Japan, and it is what it is. So before making reservations at an onsen, make sure that they accept tattoos.
Что-то нажал я. Изи-пизи, знаешь, какая страна? Land of изи-пизи. Уже другая страна, да. А вы тоже думаешь, блин, что ты говоришь с этой фигней, блин? Целый опять день вообще ни о чем. Ну, что я понимаю? Вот, нет, я себя не думал, да. Нет, понимаете. Короче, вот. Поэтому из-за этого всего все долго так усугубилось просто. А мне просто непонятно, понимаешь, что делают. Они говорят, а мы не знаем, хер его знаем, сразу не надо, следующий год начнется. Блин, ты не понимаешь, у меня денег нету. Какой следующий год? Засунься, знаешь куда, блин? Идиотка, что ли? Им вообще посрать на тебя, они как будто невменяемые, понимаешь, да? То есть как сумасшедшие какие-то. Понимаете, наоборот, такой, да? Понятно. Играть надо. Я сделаю себя сторонам, да, надо играть. Ну, репертуар классический. Классический и сложный виртуозный. Виртуозный, да. Техника. Техника это плохо. Сразу, да. Ладно, если направить. Да, надо начать только. Есть время добавить. Есть время. Ну нет. Да нет. Да нам вот она говорит, приедет, дрянь какую-нибудь дадут. Научить он трех аккордов. Нет. Смысловского какого-нибудь. Ну нет, наоборот. Нет, наоборот. Нет, мне пианино только нужна. Понимаешь? Не понимаешь. Они не понимают. То, что да, что я уже да. Ну да ладно. Он может быть что угодно, но да. Мэппинг. Киднеппинг нет. Давай. продукцию только переводишь сюда, понял. Ну да.
Unfortunately, many Japanese onsen prohibit people with tattoos from entering the facility because of the stigma associated with tattoos.
Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья! Меня зовут Куцаева Дарья. Я ведущий преподаватель проекта «Художник онлайн».
In Japan, Yakuza, or also known as organized crime, are known to have characteristic irezumi, also known as tattoos. Since a lot of these onsen facilities don't want Yakuza going to their establishment or scaring their customers, they made like a blanket statement saying that anyone with tattoos, small or large, can't enter the place. Although it may sound unfair, it's Japan, and it is what it is. So before making reservations at an onsen, make sure that they accept tattoos. One note though, if you're going to onsens with a private room or private onsen hotels where you don't have to share the space with strangers, then it should be okay to have tattoos as long as you don't show anyone in public. So for those of you that have tattoos, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you hanging. There are a few spots in Tokyo that are cool with tattoos. I have a full list on my website, so I'll be sure to leave a link in the description of the video, so you can check it out for yourself later. Alright, Wi-Fi and internet in Japan. Now this is actually one of the things that a lot of people ask me questions about in the comment section, and it's actually one of the most things that always concerns me when I go overseas. So what you need to know is that all the major cities, like Tokyo, have relatively fast internet in Japan. I even stayed at a capsule hotel in Tokyo, and their Wi-Fi was super fast. I think this should be enough for most people. Nicer hotels outside of the city should have Wi-Fi, but maybe at a slower speed. But if you're anything like me and need to be connected all the time, then there are some local options. Number one, Starbucks. On the free route, luckily Starbucks provides Wi-Fi to all its customers, and there are so many Starbucks all throughout Japan. But I found that the speeds are fast or slow depending on the amount of customers on the network. You can try other cafes, but it's hit and miss. Number two, city Wi-Fi. Another free alternative is to use the city Wi-Fi. This is only available at the major stations or areas like Shibuya, Shinjuku, Harajuku, Odaiba, etc. Connecting is fairly easy. I'll leave a link to all this information in the description. Now, if you need to be connected at all times, then you're going to need to go the paid route. So the first paid option is to rent a portable hotspot Wi-Fi and carry it around with you. Now, I think it's the easiest thing to just go to the airport and rent one out there. Another option is to get a SIM card for your unlocked mobile device. You can go to any major electronics store and they should carry it. Again, check the description for more details. Smoking in Japan. Check this out. It says no smoking area here, but right next to me, there's a smoking section. Smoking in Japan may catch a lot of you off guard, especially if you're coming from the US. But if you smoke, then you're in luck because Japan has some of the most friendly laws for smokers. But that may be changing in the near future, which I'll tell you about just a little bit later. First of all, many izakayas, which are sit-down restaurants designed for drinking, allow their customers to smoke throughout the entire restaurant and don't usually provide non-smoking sections. If you want to go to an izakaya, simply put, you're gonna have to deal with a secondhand smoke. Nicer restaurants may prohibit smoking, but some of them still accommodate their smoking customers. So if you want to eat at that kind of establishment, you should really ask before you make reservations. Some family restaurants and other establishments do attempt to divide smokers and non-smokers. smokers, but sometimes you'll find that there's nothing really separating a smoking table and a non-smoking table, other than maybe a tiny vent. And one of the biggest surprises I had when first living in Tokyo is that smoking inside is actually allowed while smoking outside is prohibited. It didn't make sense to me at first, but when you consider how busy the streets are in Tokyo, the last thing you want is someone bumping into you with their cigarette butt. The city, though, wanting to accommodate smokers, had set up smoking areas throughout the city so those smokers who need their nicotine fix can do it safely on the street. Isn't that a great idea? But to the non-smokers out there, you might be pleased to hear that they passed a law that make it more strict to smoke cigarettes inside. If they want to have a smoking section, to have it separate from the non-smoking section, otherwise they can't have a smoking section at all. Riding the train in Japan. Now, if you guys have seen any videos on Japan, you've probably seen these crazy attendants pushing people on the train. And let me tell you that the struggle is real, and it really happens, especially during rush hour. Try to avoid riding major city commuter trains during the weekday between 8 to 9:30 in the mornings, 5:30 to 7:30 in the evenings, and the weekday during rush hour. Try to avoid riding major city commuter trains during the weekday between 8 to 9:30 in the mornings, 5:30 to 7:30 in the evenings, and the last train, which is usually around midnight, and the trains reek of alcohol. Peaks may vary from train line to train line, but this is usually around midnight, and the trains reek of alcohol. Peaks may vary from train line to train line, but this should give you a rough idea of when to avoid the trains. Also, what a lot of travelers don't know is that usually the first or last part of the train on weekday mornings are reserved for women only. This is because Japan has a huge problem with men groping women on trains, especially when they're packed on the train like marshmallows in a game of Chubby Bunny. Look for the pink signs on the cart, which also indicate the women only time. In this case, mornings are reserved for women only. This is because Japan has a huge problem with men groping women on trains, especially when they're packed on the train like marshmallows in a game of Chubby Bunny. Look for the pink signs on the cart, which also indicate the women only time. In this case, 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. So we're at a restaurant right now, and one of the things that I absolutely love about Japan is the non-tipping culture. So what I mean about that is if you go to a restaurant or if you take a taxi, you never have to pay a tip. The price on the bill is the actual price you pay, and it's one of the things that I deeply appreciate. You save so much time not having to calculate the tip, and the service here is almost every time pretty good. At the same time, there's one thing you guys need to know is that there's hidden fees in some of the restaurants. It's called a toshidai, or in English, you need to know is that there's hidden fees in some of the restaurants. It's called a toshidai. One thing you guys need to know is that there's hidden fees in some of the restaurants. It's called a toshidai, or in English, the table charge. Prices vary from place to place, but ranges from 300 yen to the upper end of 1,000 yen per person at nicer places. You'll actually be able to spot it right away. When you sit down at the table before ordering drinks or food, the waiter will bring you a small dish. Once you see the small dish, then you know there's going to be a table charge. It's very Japanese in a way. They'll make you pay for a table charge, but they'll actually give you something in return. General rule is if it's a fast food place, ramen shop, or restaurant serving set lunch courses, then you don't have to worry about the table charge. Otherwise, expect a table charge. But you really need to be careful of the sneaky izakayas that make you order a certain number of dishes as well as charge you a table charge. They're usually the